Good afternoon, everyone. It's still afternoon, even though it's dark. But we're gonna get started, and we have the old, business starting, old business. Starting at 5:10. The minutes from September, did everyone have an opportunity to review them? Are they okay as submitted, or do they need to be amended?
So there was something.
I'm going to need for everyone, please speak up and kind of project towards the speaker. Or I tell you what, let's use the microphone because people can't hear once it's recorded. In order to speak, press the button and just hold it. You have to hold it.
Hello?
So what is it that you want to look at?
It's just a really minor change. So in the members present and excused and others present, should we put Mrs. Judge's name there somewhere? Would it go under others present?
No, not president.
The other members?
She's a consultant to the committee.
I was wondering if we should put her name somewhere. She was present.
But we can do that going forward. That may have been an oversight from times past, present, and just we'll add her name right after, Keisha's name. This is Judge. Okay, so they have to be amended. Okay. Dr. Fagiano was here, correct? Okay.
The other one, speaking of this, in number 9, under public comment, if I recall correctly, and please correct me if I'm forgotten, I think Ms. Apperson also made a comment about the progress reports and how when the progress report comes out, the comments are made about the goals and not necessarily the individual objectives. So some things can fall through the cracks as far as, reporting on data for individual objectives.
Vivian, what did her notes reflect and her comments? Her comments, the kind part. Let me put a question mark. Okay, sure.
I did receive, as far as from my standpoint, the CLTV that we had last, I did receive directive that we were to comment on the actual goal and not include comments concerning individual objectives, which is something new for us.
Okay, so she may have, but let me just.
Also, that's the opposite of what she was saying, because that. Yeah.
So that's the opposite of what the parent was concerned about, because I think, from my understanding, she was concerned that some of the objectives, so if you had a goal with multiple objectives, that some of those objectives could be falling through the cracks if they're not being reported on in the progress report. So it sounds like what you're being told is the opposite, to not list the specific objectives,
We do not list those specific objectives.
or comment on the specific objectives.
But on the goal as a whole. So
You have to press on the top.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I believe the way that the progress reports and the reports will read now is that we comment on the goal as a whole. However, as you take data on the goal, then all of those objectives should be included in. So I would imagine from my standpoint, collecting data in the classroom, that although we are to, the instruction that we're given is to comment on the whole, on the goal as a whole and not break it down. However, it should be in the narrative. You should receive information concerning each objective. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how it's been. And that's
How it's always been. So you've always had the progress report with the goal, not listing out the specific objectives, and so the narrative, you're right, would, ideally address all of those. I think Ms. Apperson's concern was that not all of those objectives were necessarily commented on. So while the teacher may comment on, let's say, 2 of the 3 objectives, there could be that one objective that isn't required to be commented on, isn't commented on, and so therefore it falls through the cracks.
Okay, so that, we just need to amend that to include that. Okay, anything else?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce any of us. But I'm Olitha Badia, Rehab Mahfouz is the vice chair, Vivian Austin is the secretary. We have Courtney Ferris as our teacher member, Keisha Carroll as our community member, and Ellen Shackelford as our community member as well. And Mrs. Judge will join us at the 6 o'clock hour, and our guest speaker, and the sped coordinators. So quickly going through this. So we are going to amend here's Mrs. Judge, okay? We're going to amend the September meeting minutes to reflect what we just discussed. Okay, and you're just in time. You're up, Mrs. Judge.
Okay.
Status of potential consultants to SEAC. Chandra Epps for the Hampton City Schools Family Engagement Specialist, and Ann Bain, who is the Executive Director of Community and Legislative Relations.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. I have consulted with Ms. Bain as well as Ms. Epps with regard to them becoming consulting members, and they have indicated that they are willing and able and ready to provide any level of support that's needed. However, they would not want to be noted as a consulting member, giving their workload, commitments, and the description in which they serve in the capacity of working with the city and other entities. And Ms. Bain actually indicated that she was sending you some email correspondence.
I did, I saw her briefly this afternoon. Okay, I'm not understanding. Say that again, they wouldn't want to be identified
As consulting members, so I'll give an example. Ms. Epps is the Family Engagement Title I Specialist. Title I, we only have 13 Title I schools, so that would not cover all schools, but those are schools that she's assigned to work with directly on that program. So in the capacity in which she serves, and excuse me for not.
No, you're totally right.
In the capacity in which she serves, she didn't feel that being a consulting member was appropriate for her at this time. However, wants to lend her support in any capacity that she can.
Oh, she doesn't want to be identified as a consultant?
Yes, both, she and Ms. Bain,
Okay.
but are more than willing and ready to provide any support that we need as a SEAC.
Okay. Thank you.
I did receive an email from Hank Millward, who is with VDOE, about training for SEAC members, SEAC Basic and Advanced. I don't know about FOIA and whatever else, but he said that he was planning a series of meetings. I asked him what time frame. I didn't get a response to that question. I think I just kind of worn out my welcome by then, it just kind of gone back and forth. But that is in the works for us to get some training. I was supposed to get some information for you too, wasn't I?
I did read all of this information that you sent me, so I do have a lot of information.
Okay, was it on SEAC specifically? Okay, basic and advanced, or just,
No.
was it on SEAC? No, I need to get some information to you on SEAC specifically. Do I need to get something for you too, Ellen? No?
I think with all the emails that you sent, I think that's all.
No. This is, specific to SEAC on training.
Oh, no, I don't have it. I
Okay.
just have I think what we have accomplished. You sent me the last meeting.
Right, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a little handbook. I'll have to bring it in and show you all and see if I can get some extra copies, either from PC. I think they did the training the last time to get some copies, additional copies from them for you all. Sure. Thanks. I get you.
For local supervisor committee. The DOE.
No.
You're talking about the one that you had.
Right, at the meeting, the actual at the meeting. Yeah, that one, right. I did send a link to you all for that. That was online, but the one I'm talking about is the handout that they gave at the NC meeting, which was really good. You have, okay, I think that's it. Committee assessments of SEAC from June 2018. You brand new, but I got some that are outstanding. If you have not yet gotten them to me, I need them, please. Thank you. Yeah, you did. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to put anybody on blast. So if you have not yet gotten them to me, I need them, please. Because we're trying to take a look at what we're doing. In addition to the feedback that we get from parents, we need to know what type of job we're doing as we're looking and how we can try to improve. And so that's the purpose of that. Reham, you're up.
Oh, am I?
Yes.
Status of track of recording specific parent concern.
Okay.
She said, no, I'm sorry.
So I have a spreadsheet and I probably should email it. I don't know if everyone has a computer. I have to apologize. I tried to print it and the font came out really small. So I wasn't able to figure out how to print it and yeah, it wasn't legible when it was printed. So I'm gonna have to get help from somebody who's more technologically savvy. But I can, if it would be helpful, I can pass it around. I can pass my laptop around if that.
Yeah, you don't have to do that, but just
Yeah.
kind of go.
Sure.
No, don't pass the laptop.
No?
No, just go through it.
But basically what it is, we have a column for a disability category. So we can track, the concerns coming in by disability. We have a column for grade level, column for school, so we can see if there are any trends, the date the concern was shared. And then, so of the ones that we've had, and we don't have actually many, which is a really great thing, actually. It's awesome.
I've been remiss in getting them to her. So, yeah, I'm sorry. We do have more than we should. Yeah.
Okay.
But this judge has hit the ground running hard.
She has, really.
Yeah.
So those are, just to give you an idea, the dates are October 2nd, October 3rd, October 3rd, and October 5th. So those are the ones that I have. And actually, I need to add the one from our last SEAC meeting with Ms. Epperson, her public comment. So that actually needs to be added in here as well. So I guess there are 5.
No, and the parent called me, talking to a parent yesterday. And so, and then because we were reporting in our end of year report about parent concerns and things that we were tracking then, I do want to go back and capture what we were looking at from the 2017-2018 school year, because that was in that, and we can break that out and show it by school year for tracking purposes so that you can see, I guess, the trends and do it in graph format, whether we're going up, going down, or remain the same. So,
Yeah, so what I can do, I think it would probably be easier to email it out to everybody so that way you can see it and read it. Yeah, I know, and I apologize. I was trying to print it. But basically, what we're trying to do is find what are those, repeating concerns, right? Even if it's not a repeating concern, I mean, it's still important. So just to give you an idea of those 4, and then of course there's a 5th one I need to add. There's one concern, low teacher expectations for student, refusal to observe class, failure to implement IEP, and I do have sort of specifics, right? So, you know, like under the comments, it has specifically what this parent, you know, said or caregiver. Let's see here. My comments are. You should be more. Okay, some of the other ones, lack of teacher training, lack of communication with parents, resistance to inclusion, bullying, actually, we do have one, sorry. So bullying, no, actually, I apologize. Bullying is blank right now. I put that in there because I kind of thought it would come up. But right now it's blank, again, as of those 5. Inability for ABA therapists to work with students in schools or to observe, and then the ones that I just discussed. So those are the, you know, some of the common, you know, some of the yeses that come up in those 5. So, you know, our goal is to track them and of course, you know, pass them on to our leadership so that they can work and, you know, because we can't solve anything. We work with our wonderful administration to help us, you know, help the parents solve those issues.
Please forgive me, I inadvertently skipped C, status of revised bylaws. So, you all saw, and on the back page, we had the significant revisions so that you could see what we did. There were some other little minor edits. And I struck my name out in the draft simply because, you know, I wasn't sure if I was going to be the chair when these were signed, so I just, you know, no, you didn't. But anyway, so hopefully we will be able to get these amended. And as you saw in the notation, that the change was made upon the advice of the school board's legal counsel. When we first put that language in there, we were looking at how we could reduce liability exposure to the school division. Actually, if you know, a parent or someone who charged for their services as an advocate, somebody can think, well, you know, the school division supports them, they're recommending them. And so we put that language in there. And we also, it wasn't discriminatory, we were accused of discriminating against a specific individual. But that wasn't it. It made us think, well, maybe there's another way we can do this to reduce liability exposure. We want people who are going to be on board for the right reasons. That way. And I'm not a politically correct person. I just kind of put it out there. The best way I know how to be as clear as I possibly can without tiptoeing around the roses, so to speak. I don't mind smelling them, but I'm not trying to tiptoe around them. I'm trying to make it plain so that everybody understands what I'm saying. So, on advice of legal counsel, and they are our bylaws, we did not have to change them, but because we are a collaborative body, we thought it in the best interest to make the change. Now, were there any other changes that anyone saw? And I didn't put in the substantive in the background about, I did not put about as an additional duty for the SEAC chair to attend school board meetings. We modified that to make it clearer to say, as your schedule permits. And the reason why we think that that is important, because oftentimes, when it's out of sight, it's out of mind. You know, and so if you don't know what the school division is planning for the entire division, you don't know how SPED might factor into that. And we know that Mrs. Judge is more than capable in everything, but it does take a village. And so when we show up, it lets the school board know that we are engaged and we're watching, you know, as well as to advise. We cannot advise if we are unaware. And so we did add that, and I didn't put that as a significant addition. Okay. Any comments? Any questions? Update on superintendent's meeting and decorum guidelines. Mrs. Judge forwarded a copy of those guidelines to me and to Rhiannon. We have some concerns that we will discuss with you. We just haven't gotten together yet to really go over. I have a marked up copy, and she has a marked up copy, and so we want to synthesize our comments so that when we do speak with you, that it's not piecemeal, if you will. So that's coming, and we're hoping to get that to you before Thanksgiving. Can we do that? Can we do that? Okay.
That will be shared in the
Well, after we speak to Mrs. Judge, we will share the greater thing that's been synthesized with the full committee for input, review and input.
You can actually see the current copy of the guidelines online. So if you Google.
If you Google, if you go to Hampton City Schools website and just go to the search box and look up decorum guidelines, there were some changes made, but there weren't that many changes. So you can, get a feel for sort of what the current document looks like, and then see what we share more later.
Judge, I'm sorry, the instructional paradigm after the elimination of instructional coaching positions. An update, if you don't mind. We spoke about it, we spoke to Rhiannon and to me about it, give the full committee an update.
Thank you. So as everyone is aware, there was an adjustment made to personnel from the 17-18 school year to present day 18-19 school year to include the adjustment being where there was an elimination of the 8 instructional coaches. The 8 instructional coaches that we had previously. The adjustments that were made
Are you on test?
testing. Yeah, I'll just speak from the side maybe. So with regard to the adjustments of the 8 previous instructional coaches, the adjustment or the reframing of our practice has been that we do have 2 instructional specialists who are designated at the elementary and also at the secondary level to support instruction. And we have 8 coordinators that are working strategically with targeted schools to provide professional development opportunities. And what we did at the beginning of the year when I came on board was we tiered schools and level of supports based on teacher and teacher needs. And so our CLTs are centered around those targeted needs as identified not only by building administrators, but just in looking at data and IEP review and instructional review. We've also incorporated collaborative practices across the division with regard to working with our curriculum instruction and assessment team. So we have been collaboratively providing professional development for general curriculum teachers in that capacity. And we also have ongoing CLTs which are our learning team meetings and professional development with our teachers of our students who receive their curriculum in the academic self-contained class as well as the functional class. And so there is a lot of teacher support embedded into their everyday, it's job embedded professional development along with some additional professional development that is afforded to teachers. And those instructional coaches help support those and those efforts. Additionally, all of the coordinators, including myself, go through an intense coaching leadership training so that we are skilled in the art of coaching, so that we are truly providing a coaching model for teachers and supporting them in the work that they have to get done for students. So all of the previous coordinators had been through the training. The two new that we brought on board, as well as myself, are finalizing that training next week. And then we have also 2 behavior specialists on staff that are designated at the elementary and secondary level. And one of the behavior specialists is new to us as of this week, but not new to education. So we're excited to bring her on board with her skill set.
Thank you, Ms. Judge. So we're at 5. Request solicitation from others to post information on SEAC's website. I hope that you all took an opportunity, had an opportunity to look at the insert that I had in the email that I sent. And it was a request, it was a solicitation to post something on SEAC's website, but it was, they were trying to sell something, it was, something related to their business. I'd like your input as to whether or not you think that we should include them on our resource page. Personally, I don't think we should. Okay. I see 2 additional no's. 3.
Was that the attorney?
No, it wasn't the attorney, it was someone else. That was, so, it was embedded in the, draft agenda. It was embedded and it was an email and from the gentleman asking, about looking, and I said, well, my response to him was, I will present it to the full committee and either I or someone else will get back to you with an answer. But I am not in favor of people wanting to use our website for monetary gain or solicitations.
I agree. I think it was related to putting a service that could be beneficial to families. That's one thing. If you use for this, for reaching out in these businesses, and I just think it would work. It'd be a lot more than okay, so we're not gonna do that. Well, that's the better, and that's a policy.
Okay, we're in agreement. So new business, Arlethea Stevenson Award. Now, Mrs. Ferris was kind enough to say she would participate. She would be willing to be on that committee. And I think Reham, you said, but this is what I propose. This is what I propose, and I would like Ms. Ferris to be the chair of that subcommittee. And I would like for you to chair it, and we support you in putting it together. I've got all the stuff that you need, and I'll be glad to help you, but for you to take point on that. So we're looking at, I would like for us to not just have us do it, but definitely have a SEAC committee member chair that subcommittee. So looking for, a principal. Last year, it was Dr. Johnson. Ms. Black, Heidi Black, had said that she would be willing to serve again. And so you have someone who's familiar with it. And what is the title? Help me out, you all. What is the title of someone who serves on every committee as an what is it? Yeah, okay. So I'd be on it too, to help you out with it, but you have point, you know? And so we would have a principal, a SEAC coordinator, and you would take point on that, representing the teacher. How about that? Are you willing to do that? Okay. Thank you. So next up, on that, along the line, is we need to draft some tips for writing and submitting a strong nomination package. Last year, we were, I should say, going for this year's award in June. Personally, I was a little disappointed to see some of the nomination packages. For someone to write that the teacher reviewed an IEP before an IEPT meeting, and they thought that that was exceptional. That's their job. My expectation is that you're not going to go into any IEPT meeting and not be prepared to discuss it. So that's not above and beyond. And for someone else to write, oh yeah, they take a child on a field trip with them. They take a child with disabilities on a field trip with them. Seriously? So I wasn't impressed. And so I said, well, there's some things that we need to do to help people write a stronger package. That this is the caliber of person we're looking for. Hands down, yours came way above here, just really, really strong. The people who wrote your packages, they got it right. And so if someone from, and this is just ideas that I'm doing out of, if you're writing a letter of recommendation from the school division, whether it's the teacher or whether it's the principal or assistant principal, have it on the school's letterhead and sign it. That's an anybody can do a letter on bond paper and submit it unsigned and say, here, I'm recommending, I'm nominating this person. So just to kind of step it up a little bit. And then funding streams. Looking at Walmart has a community grant program. They want you to submit everything online, but even though we have an EIN number from the IRS, it's not yet on their database, and I don't know how long or why it's taking so long for it to show up on the IRS database. But I need to get with somebody, and I will help you with that, Ms. Ferris, with that funding piece, and also send you a copy of the EIN number. Last year, I made a presentation for the Mayor's Committee for People with Disabilities. They were kind enough to really say, we'll grant you the funding, only to be later told that by the city attorney that they couldn't do it. And so we're still looking at different funding streams. One was not only Walmart as a community partner, but also various financial institutions. And I've reached out to my financial institution on a number of occasions. I'm not exactly sure what black hole it goes into, but I never hear back from them. So I'll continue to follow up with on that area.
I do want to say, I did notice, talking to this community. Okay. I was extremely honored, I'm still extremely honored to have received this. I have my plaque and my apple sitting on my desk every day, and this was just an amazing award to receive. And I was so thrilled to see that the committee decided to continue the award. Thank you for asking me to be a part of it. I would love to do my part, and I do want to say that I work with a wonderful group of teachers at Jones, so I'm very happy to hear that they put together a wonderful packet on my behalf. But I want to say thank you once again. It means the world to me, and I'm glad that I can serve in a larger capacity with SEAC.
Just want to say thank you, Mrs. Ferris, because I was a very lucky recipient of her services last year. My daughter, went to 6th grade last year at Jones, and she had had a really rough time in her elementary school. And if it wasn't for Ms. Ferris and all the hard work, communication, passion, respect, caring, taking the time to truly individualize instruction, she created a website just for her with assignments and resources just for it was amazing. It was a really great experience. And my worst nightmare, my worst fears about middle school, it was great. It was probably the best year in all of her academic, career. So, she's an amazing teacher. I don't, of all the teachers that all my kids have had, we've had some great ones, but Mrs. Ferris is definitely on the top. So, thank you really, because you change lives. And, my daughter at some point, she was depressed, and we were going down the road, and she turned it around for us.
So on that note, maybe you can also give us some tips that we can put on our website about inclusion, for both, and being a stronger collaborative community. Something that we can do to make, suggestions to not only administrators in the school division, but also the community as a whole. I've been saddened to be at community events where people have marginalized people with disabilities and not really wanting them to be a part of our community. And there is a lack of compassion and a hardness of heart and even a mean-spiritedness. And I'm saying stuff, I know it's going to be out here on the book, but that it really is just sad to hear how some adults have spoken about children with disabilities and really not wanting them in the classrooms with their non-disabled children. Those kids have problems. They cause problems. And when I was coming up, they were in this classroom separate and apart from it. I don't know how come they can't go back and just be, again, outside out. So maybe you can kind of help us help the adults out there be a little bit more inclusive in their thinking. And that's part of this cultural shift that we're looking at, trying to do. So, Ms. Judge, you want to speak to the quarterly meetings with the superintendent and deputy superintendent and with you?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just kind of transitioned into new business. I didn't say that as well. But yeah, quarterly meetings with the superintendent, deputy superintendent, and yourself.
Do you want me to speak to that or you want to speak to it?
You want to speak to that?
I will. So Ms. Matheny, your dialogue with regard to inclusive practices was very timely in the sense that I do feel like in Hampton City Schools, we have a ways to go, but we are moving in that direction. And so a lot of our quarterly meetings that we have, you and Ms. included, have had with the superintendent and deputy superintendent is around the practices that we currently have in place in Hampton City Schools, what adjustments need to be made, and looking to move in that direction in a manner that is going to address the needs of all students. I also sit on or attend the Mayor's Council for People with Disabilities committee meetings, and we just had a meeting last week, and so when we talk about those inclusive practices and what it needs to look like here in Hampton City Schools as a collective body, not just as a school division, then I feel like we are getting the word out there about the needs of not just students with disabilities, but all kids, but in particular, students with disabilities. And we were at the meeting just last week, and we had some good plans and some good things in place that I have brought back to the deputy superintendent as well as Dr. Smith with regard to how we can continue to refine our inclusive practices.
Also, with those quarterly meetings that the superintendent, deputy superintendent, and Mrs. Judge have committed to having with the chair and vice chair, we will let you know when they're coming up. So if there's anything that you want us to mention to them, excuse me, while we're doing that meeting, we can bring it up at that time, okay? And I think the next one is not until like January, right? In January that we will be doing that. So it'll be after the holidays. And so Reham has something she wants to share.
Lisa and I were talking the other day, just kind of brainstorming, and VCU actually has this grant, apparently, VCU Inclusion Project, and they can lend, and we haven't dug deep in the website, but just from what we've read, it sounds like they have a lot of really good ideas. They have a lot of schools who've done a lot of different activities to promote inclusion and disability awareness in their communities. And the really neat thing about them is they provide technical support. So if you have a school or an organization, it doesn't just have to be a school that's trying to, raise disability awareness, they can lend some technical support. So we have to dig. There's quite a lot of information. We didn't really have time to dig, but it's really very good. So that's one thing. There are a couple other things that we talked about, but that was one I thought big thing, because VCU is obviously very big and very experienced, at least in autism, you have the Center of Excellence.
And so when you talk about VCU ACE, which is the Autism Center for Excellence, we are partnering and have worked with them previously, and we'll collaborate. We're collaborating with them, and I will be in a meeting on next Tuesday with Joan Bruner and the others throughout the division, throughout the Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth, but it's the Peninsula. So the other school divisions, we have a meeting on next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, where we'll be talking about some of the technical support. And then we also have a leadership team, and I have 4 people on that team, 2 of my coordinators and 2 of the 2 behavior specialists, and we've done our first quarterly meeting about the technical supports and assistance that we're putting in place with regard to inclusive practices and in particular students with autism.
Very much, Ms. Judge. So I just wanted to share with you, we're the committee, something that, something that we're working on at the college. So Dan Habib is a parent, a father of a child with cerebral palsy. He's also a filmmaker, and he's done quite a few films about a variety of topics. One of them is Including Samuel, where he talks about his child and how, he was included in elementary school and kind of tries to show the best practices when it comes to inclusion. But he's done quite a few films, but his latest one is called Intelligent Lives, and it follows 3 youth who were given the label of intellectual disability, and it kind of looks at the IQ as a measure for intelligence, and sort of looks at the historical context and questions, some of the validity, if you will, but more importantly, looks at what these 3 young adults have been able to accomplish, even though they've had this intellectual disability label. So it's really a film about, challenging the stereotypes and really raising the bar, and transitions basically, how some of these young adults found acceptance at universities, living in dorms, getting certificates. One of them is a graduate teaching assistant at Syracuse University. Another one was in a sheltered workshop, and then she came out of it. So it's really very good. And so we at the college, we're thinking, because it deals with transitions, and we want at the college to be open to people with disabilities. We thought that could be something that we screen, hold a screening. And so I wanted to kind of double check that the committee, and I'll send out an excerpt of the movie, but I wanted to see if that was something that SEAC would be interested in co-sponsoring. There are no funds involved, so exactly, it's free, it's open to the public. Our student activities is going to be providing a fairly heavy refreshments. So we'll have it at 6:30, so that way people can come have some pizza or whatnot. And our library has purchased the movie. Our vice president is going to be on the panel, Dr. English. She's a vice president for academic affairs and workforce development. So she has a really good sort of view of the college. And I'm interested in her talking about workforce development in particular, because some of those programs, I'm not an expert on this, but some of those programs I think would be really good for, students who aren't necessarily seeking a 2-year degree. So, and we're trying to find students, and if you have any ideas for, others to serve on the panel, please, But I want to know if this is something that SEAC would be comfortable in sponsoring.
I'm bored.
Yeah, so it's actually going to be in April 17th. That's a Wednesday, I want to say, Wednesday from 6:30 to 8:30. And so the movie itself is 70 minutes, and then it's going to be followed by this panel presentation. And we were actually still brainstorming, the panel and what we're going to be asking, but the focus is going to be on transitions, because that's really the focus of the film. And we'd like to highlight some successes from Thomas Nelson students who have severe disabilities, but yet are, making it, if you will, in an institution of higher education. And of course, Dr. English, our vice president, she can talk about some of the programs that we have and some of those opportunities for students once they transition from high school to pursue higher ed, and whether it be credit or non-credit. And, we were looking for, again, other panelists from the community. So we don't want to have too high of a panel, but. Awesome.
Were you volunteering?
Yeah, so that's really the plan.
I know from my perspectives in regard to saying that it focuses on transitions, and I know, Ms. Judge, you have done wonderful things already this year for bringing to light the importance of students actively participating in planning their future and what they can do and seeking out that higher education. I know that now our students are receiving their own, letter to attend their meeting, and it's small things like this that we do. So I thank you very much. It's small things like this that we do in order to get our students more involved and to promote, their awareness of what they can accomplish. And that to me is the key. So I am absolutely for us, representing them.
And I just want to say, we have so many young people in our program at the CSB that transition now. Parents are worried. A lot of them don't think that their kids can go to college or learn a trade. I'm trying to train myself, so getting some of those parents to come out, that would be awesome. So if, I'll be more than happy to promote it, send it out to our parents.
The other have a lot.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt, but we're looking at time. We're looking at time, so just go ahead, finish your thought. Your thought.
I just wanted to say that we can also have the transition specialist to Ms. Harris to serve on the committee and to help with that, because then she can get the word out to all of the high school, the 14 and up students and things of that nature, so we can get parents here too.
That's great. And my hope is that we'll also reach business leaders, not just the parents, obviously, because I want parents to see this and say, hey, my child can do this too. But also business leaders, really, because if business leaders can see what some of those adults, young adults, are capable of doing, I think that will bring a lot of awareness and hopefully bring more opportunities for Canada too. So, you know, we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much. We ran a little over, and so we're gonna start just maybe 5 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and we're gonna transition into, the presentation part of our meeting. Oh, no pun intended.
How are you doing? I'm good.
CJ, how are you? How are you?
Thank you. Okay.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, always. Okay. See you in
CJ, nice to see you. You got it. G-Money. How are you? Good, good, good.
What we're doing, what we're talking about. Yeah. So are you going to do this tonight?
I can, I don't know, I mean, like, okay, she's going to, she has it up, she's paused it now. But so that you can see him and other people who are speaking, just to keep it, you know? Once it starts, just to, you know, keep it on the speakers. Yeah, and that's basically it. And then when we're done, I'll come up and hit the end stream. But I think she's got it on pause right now. Handout. Oh, okay.
I did
Thank you.
25. This
Okay.
one is the original. If you want to take that one in case you need to make more, these are two-sided.
Okay, great. Thank you. What do I need to know real quick?
So, it's actually already going right now, because if we stopped it, then we'd have to do a whole other one. So once it's finished, you just click end stream, and then you'll get an option for done. Okay. And then you just click done. And then it's
End stream is done. Okay. Yep. All right.
Is that good? And although it looks reversed or
And so, just, if someone asks a question, I just will,
yeah, you can just do that. And then this equipment is, this is what they were saying, Robin, to take it all to your department. I guess so, I don't know. Okay, so if y'all do that, that's fine. And then we can just pick it up. Because all this equipment just goes in the blue bag. And the equipment belongs to the other department. So I just have to do that.
Okay, so tomorrow morning, I'm not even out in the buildings for meetings. I'll put it in my office. I'm just, I'll just slide it in my office.
Always, that's so rock.
So we can just get it.
You can go and get it whenever. Just tell Connie that she's always there. And I'll make sure.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
I did it on Friday. Yes, we Hello. I'm well, how are you?
Good evening, everyone. We're going to reconvene and transition into the general meeting. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. I am Olitha Bethia, the chair of the Hampton SEAC. I have a grandson who is 10 years old. He goes to Burbank Elementary School. He has multiple disabilities, but, you know, just grateful that we're working through them, and he is now beginning to thrive. He likes where he's going to school, and he's enjoying it. So each one of us, we're going to introduce ourselves and tell a little bit about how we started on this journey before we open it up for public comments, and then our guest speaker this evening, who will be speaking on functional behavioral assessments and behavioral intervention plans.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Rehan Mahfouz. I have 3 children. I have a 16-year-old, hard to believe. I have a 12-year-old who's on the spectrum girl, a daughter at Jones Middle School. And I have a younger son who is 8, and he's at Burbank, and he's also on the spectrum. My oldest is typically development.
My name is Vivian Austin, and I do have one great grandson, great grandson, that has a traumatic brain injury. And he is now 20, and he will be graduating this year. He's made marvelous progress in everything he's doing. He's also working at Versability, and we are praying and hoping that next year he will be there or in Project Search. One or the other I'm looking for.
My name is Courtney Ferris. I'm a teacher at Hampton City Schools, and I have one wonderful son that attends James Magnet Middle School with me. He has overcome some major challenges in his little years. And I came to SEAC, I'm new to SEAC this year. I was honored to win the Olympia Stevenson Award and was invited to serve on the SEAC board. So I'm very appreciative and very happy to be here. Thank you.
My name is Keisha Carroll, and I work for the Hampton Newport News Community Services Board. Although I don't have a child that attends Hampton City School, but all of our young people at Hampton Newport News Community Services Board are part of me. So I sit on this board to be an advocate and support for the families that we provide services to.
Good evening. I'm Kimberly Judge, Director of Special Education for Hampton City Schools. While I am new to Hampton City Schools, I am not new to special education, and I'm really excited to be a part of the collaborative, inclusive practices that we are embarking on and continuing to do here in Hampton City Schools for our students with disabilities.
Good evening. I'm Ellen Shackelford, and I am proud to be sitting on this board. I don't have any children with disabilities, however, I have a disability, as you can tell. And I serve on a board. It's called the Hampton Mayor's Committee with People with Disabilities. And I work with several children with disabilities, and I hope to continue to be an advocate for all.
Additionally, tonight we have with us Dr. John Caggiano. He is the Deputy Superintendent for Hampton City Schools.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure being here with you this evening, and as Ms. Judge alluded to, I can't say enough about the collaborative practices and the opportunity to partner with SEAC throughout the school.
Thank you. We also have this evening all of our special education coordinators, and I'm going to pass the mic to them and allow them to introduce themselves and tell you which schools they support. What do you want me to start on this end and go that way? I'll go from this way.
Good evening. Good evening. Ooh. Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Butler. I'm one of the SPEC coordinators, and I work with and support all the 4 high schools this year. Also transition, project search, and also work with the functional and MD teachers and the high school academic teachers. Glad to see y'all tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Heidi Black, another special education coordinator. I work with elementary reading programs as well as directly supporting Asbury, Booker, no, sorry, not Booker anymore. Asbury, Bassett, Barron, Langley, and Smith elementary schools.
Good evening. I'm also a special education coordinator. My name is Chanel McKelton Braxton. I am assigned to Armstrong Elementary School, Phoenix School, as well as the Adult Learning Center and all of the out-of-division placements.
Good evening. Kathy Adler. I'm a coordinator for special education. I support Cooper, Craft, Forest, Bowden Early Childhood Center, and our Mallory Head Start. I work with the early childhood special education programs this year.
Good evening. My name is Marie Giles, and I'm also a special education coordinator with Hampton City Schools. I currently support Booker Elementary School, Tyler Elementary School, and Jones Magnet Middle School. I'm also the 504 coordinator for Hampton City Schools, and I support our related service providers.
And my name is Aisha Rucker. I'm one of the coordinators as well, and I support Aberdeen, Bryant, Hunter B. Andrews, Lindsay Middle School, and Tarrant Middle School, and I also do middle school literacy.
Thank you. We have a great team. We really have a great team. Now, as we move on, this is your time. Does anyone have any public comments that they would like to make?
Who's either represents Bradley?
It's not me. We do have two coordinators that are not here this evening. Tanya Logan is the coordinator for Spratly, Sims, Eaton, Cary Elementary School.
Give me that name again.
Tanya Logan. But any of us would be happy to speak with you after the meeting. If you have some concerns or questions, then we can also get into it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Mrs. Judge, do you have an update for us? Is there anything you want to share? No? Well, this evening, we are pleased and honored to have with us Mr. C.J. Butler, who will be presenting on functional behavioral assessments, FBAs, and behavior intervention plans, BIPs. Mr. Butler is an educational consultant with educational programs and interventions for children and is a master lecturer in Old Dominion University's Special Education Department. Mr. Butler earned both his Bachelor of Science degree in HPER and Master of Science degree in Special Education from ODU. He was named the Distance Learning Faculty of the Year in 1999. Mr. Butler worked for over 7 years at the Training and Technical Assistance Center at ODU, which is better known as TTAC, okay, for most of us, okay? He provides training and technical assistance to school divisions throughout Virginia. He has worked in both public and private residential treatment schools as a teacher and an administrator. Mr. Butler has extensive experience as a trainer and presenter at the local, state, and national level. His areas of interest include working with students who have challenging behaviors, collaboration and consultation, and effective models of quality instruction for students with disabilities. Mr. Butler is well known throughout the Commonwealth and the nation. So please join me in welcoming Mr. C.J. Butler.
I never get tired of hearing that bio. I want to thank you all for having me. First of all, I was telling folks I got a chance to see some old friends, and then I saw Courtney, and I enjoy working with SEAC because they do good work. They do the work that needs to be done to bridge the efforts between parents and schools, and I think that's a very important part of what we do. And so tonight for me, it's just an opportunity to come out and talk to you guys a little bit about functional assessment. I was on the original task force that developed the guidelines for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and there's still, the same guidelines are still there. Functional assessment hasn't changed substantively since 1997 when we first really learned about it. So it's not that there's anything vitally new, but I think it's very important, especially for those of us that have been in the business a while, to constantly, renew and remember what we're supposed to do. And so what I want to do tonight is just kind of go through basics of what functional assessment is, what a behavior plan really should be, and then, take any questions that y'all might have. There's a lot of myths and there's a lot of misinformation that centers around behavior planning. And quite honestly, the reason that happens is because if you've read the law, which I assume some of you probably have, and we're bored to death, but the law is silent on behavior planning. It says we must conduct a functional assessment. It says we must develop behavior plans, but it doesn't really tell schools what needs to be in it. So they leave it up to the state to regulate. The state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia has done a great job of developing some guidelines for us. But the problem is that even within those guidelines, there's a fair amount of discussion, debate about what it is. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm just going to kind of walk through what functional assessment is, what behavior planning is. And I'm going to refer often to what the federal guidelines say and what the state regulations say. A lot of school divisions then take it upon themselves to do other things. I don't really speak to that, that's not really my role here. I will be happy to give you information that I have, but I was in a division recently and they said, well, in their division, they have a specific team that does all their FBAs. And I said, oh, that's nice, but that's not what the law says we should do. And they kind of looked at me funny and they said, but they're the most trained people. But the law says functional assessment should be conducted by the stakeholders, people who know the kid. And you don't bring it'd be nice. I'm sure if I hang my shingle and say, hey, I'll start doing your FBAs, there'd be school divisions that would be very happy to have CJ come in and do them. But see, if I'm doing your FBAs and writing your VIPs, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave them with you, and you're going to have to implement them. You don't want that. And so I really want to speak to what it is and what it isn't, and let's get started. So the title tonight is Don't Fail to Plan, Plan to Succeed. Most of the time what I find is that when FBA fails, it's not because the faculty doesn't know what to do. It's more often that they just don't plan correctly. They don't carry out the assessment process correctly, okay? So normally I don't have recording devices, so I kind of open it up and say, what do we know about behavior and behavior change? And I think most of us know stuff, all right? But what I want to do is throw out a couple of things that I think are very fundamental that we all need to know. The first thing is the vast majority of the behavioral responses you're going to see in your students are learned responses. They're learned responses. And what that means is it's not to assign blame. It's not to say, well, he learned it at home or he learned it at school. That's not the point. The point is that it's learned. And since it's learned, that gives us great hope, because that means it can be unlearned and retaught. So we can change behavior. We can change behavior. And even those behaviors that are often referred to as organically embedded. My son, when he was younger, had to go over to CHKD, and they actually induced a seizure, which seizures are organic, but they were able to induce it. So that tells you that we can manipulate even those deeply rooted behaviors that we often don't think about. So behaviors learned. Second, if we plan on changing behavior, you have to be willing to give it the time and energy necessary to change it. Most of our kids exhibit the behaviors they exhibit because they work, okay? So when you see a child misbehave, oftentimes as the adult, we interpret that as misbehavior. But what you have to understand first is the child is choosing that response because it works. And quite honestly, and you guys have been around long enough, all you guys are educators and been around schools, kids who behave the right way every day, they don't get a whole lot of anything. So what happens is when kids really crave attention or when they really want something, they learn squeaky wheel. And so they'll act out and they'll do things to get the attention and or whatever tangible they want. So behavior takes time to change. And along with that, in order to change it, you must replace it. You can't just stop everything. So I think one of the things that I work with teachers the most is when I go into meetings, teachers want to tell me all these things that the kid is doing, right? And then I'll say to the teacher, well, what do you want the child to do? What do you think the teacher says? I want him to stop. Well, okay. But the absence of a response is not a response, right? So we've got to teach that child a response to take the place of what they're currently using, that you want them to stop. And that's the hard part, because that's what the bib is. See, and that's why this whole process is really a very systematic process. It's rooted on following step by step. I know people don't really like step-by-step types of processes. I love them because I can stay focused. I know what I'm supposed to do. For others, they feel like it's too structured, too rigid. But what we know from the research is that when we follow the process, it works. 75% of the cases that were documented and followed longitudinally showed that the child made positive progress and gains from a systematic, thorough functional assessment. And so we're going to talk about what constitutes that in just a moment. There's lots of other stuff. Let's not spend too much time. So a couple of quick things, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I think it's very important to realize that schools have changed. And when I was in earlier and I was listening to people talking about, instructional and literacy coaches and all of these things that are so different in our schools today than when I was a teacher or when I was an administrator. And what we have to also understand is that the way we educate our students now has changed dramatically. I came along in a time in special education where I had 22 kids in my class, and they were all mine, all day, every day, all right? And I love them dearly, but I didn't have to really worry about other teachers, and I work with my parents and I work with my kids. Times have changed now. We now have a greater emphasis on inclusion, which is so good. I mean, it's so great to see kids being successful, but it also adds a whole different layer in terms of behavior planning. It adds another person to the mix. And unless or until we get everybody kind of on the same sheet of music, that can be a pretty big problem. Because a lot of folks, to change behavior, you have to make a commitment. This isn't something that you just say, hey, I want to change the behavior of this kid, and it happens overnight. You've got to commit to do the hard work. And when you have other teachers involved, that creates a greater demand for training. And it also can create bigger problems in the system. And we'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. And we have obviously more learning behavior problems. And part of that, certainly we look at all kinds of different things. I hear teachers talk about different things. But the reality is our expectations of students in schools have changed. And, kids are tested more. And I'm not here to, I need to tell everybody right up front, I'm a big fan of assessment. I think it's, the data that drives instruction is how we evaluate our kids. So assessing kids does not bother me. But the fact is that we have kids who struggle in the traditional classroom and with the traditional instruction, and that creates problems. So we know we have these issues, and there's no simple answer to them, unfortunately. This is an easy one. This is an easy one. Whenever I do my trainings in Norfolk this past year, I did my FBA training, my 2-day training up there, and I had 125, 130 teachers, administrators. When I asked this question, I know what the answer is. They want to know, how do we make all the behavior problems go away? How do we stop having these problems? Well, unfortunately, there's no single thing or no single intervention that's going to work. But there is one practice that works every time for every kid. Know what it is? Hard work. If you're willing to work hard, you can change behavior. But you have to commit to it. It can't be just something that you do as a side. It has to be something that you make a concerted effort to do everything you're supposed to do and do it correctly. And if you don't know how to do something, you got to get help. You got to ask for help. Because if you do it wrong, you can set yourself back a number of steps. It's not like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It might be 1 step forward and 10 steps back. So we need to recognize there's no single intervention that I can give you. If there was, we could have started there. Oops. There we go. All right. So what I always also share with folks, and I think this is important because a lot of times the terminology that we use, it gets confusing to people, but it's very important that you understand what the terms mean. And so these are basically the 6 principles of behavior change that are universal. In other words, they are axiomatic. If you want to increase a behavior, you have to reinforce, period. Plain and simple. Punishment in isolation never increases a response. There's absolutely no research, none, anywhere, that suggests that punishment and isolation will improve student performance. Okay, now, can you pair punishment with other things? Yes, and we do that. We use a strategy called differential reinforcement, where we pair strategies together or interventions together. But it's important to recognize that, unfortunately, a lot of time we have behaviors that we have to stop because they're safety issues, because they're dangerous. And those are the ones that really are the hardest to plan for, believe it or not, because it takes longer. You have to stop that behavior that's potentially dangerous. I use the example when I was an instructional specialist in one of my other lives. I had a student who ran out of the building and was running towards the interstate. And the staff had been told, you know, no hands-on kind of thing, right? Well, you know, fortunately, we had a couple of staff who realized, you stop that kid, you stop them, and we'll figure out from there, you know, and that's what we did. We stopped them, got them back in the building, held a meeting, got the parents in, we started talking, look, we don't want to do this. We don't want to chase your child. We don't want them bolting from the building, so we need to come up with a plan. And, you know, those are the kinds of responses that really open your eyes. You know, I think we often think it's just little things like calling out answers or walking around the classroom, but there can be some major issues. And when you have safety issues, you need to understand they take a whole different type of planning. So one of the other things that I think I just want to point out on this slide that I want to have you pay attention to is one of the problems that we have is that when kids misbehave, I want you guys to think about this, you guys that work with kids. When kids misbehave, how fast do the adults respond to that behavior? Immediately, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When kids behave correctly, how fast do we respond to that?
Yeah.
We don't. Well, we don't. We don't. In fact, we might ignore it.
Yeah.
And when we ignore it, what we've essentially done is we've created an environment that is one step short of punishment. So the likelihood of increasing the response goes down. And what we have to get folks to understand is, if we want our consequences to act in the manner that we want them to, in other words, if we want our reinforcers to work, if we want our tactics for extinction or whatever to work, the closer in, the better off we are. And this is particularly true. I heard a couple of you say you work with early childhood. This is particularly true with early childhood. The younger child, I mean, if you go up to a 4-year-old and ask them what they did an hour ago, they can't tell you, right? So how can they possibly be benefiting from a reward or a reinforcer on Friday that they did something on Monday? That doesn't hold much water. And the other thing I don't have my rubber band on today to pop myself because I just did it. I used the word reward instead of reinforce. I'm trying to get all of my folks now that come to hear me speak to promise me you'll stop using the word reward and start using the word reinforce. Here's why. How many of you, when you work with adults, find that the adults are resistant to the concept of rewarding a kid for doing what's expected? Right? I hear it all the time. But what I found is that adults are not averse to reinforcing a behavior. So in other words, what I'm trying to get folks to, and it's taken me 2 years to stop doing it and a lot of rubber band pops on my wrist. Because I grew up in the time where that was the term we used. We were PBIS and we were reward-based. And now what I'm trying to get folks to understand is we reinforce behavior. We don't reward the student. And so we reinforce behavior because we want it to repeat. So I'm using that, trying to get everybody to buy in and help me with that. So please do. All right, here we go. FBA. It's a team problem-solving process, not an event. What does that mean? Well, it means that once you've started the process, you've begun a very long-term series of meetings and lots of stuff. It's dynamic, it's not static. It's not, I get this assessment done, I write this plan, got that one off my back. Doesn't work that way. It's not an event. So what you're gonna find is that in well-developed behavior plans, you're having to go back and edit those and change those as behavior changes. Very similarly, in the same fashion as you do an IEP. I tell people all the time, when I get to go out and visit schools in a couple of capacities. I supervise teachers that are coming out of our program at ODU, which is always fun. But every now and then I show up at a school, and if you ever see me in a shirt and tie, kind of like Dr. Caggiano, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. That means CJ got sent by somebody to come visit your school. and I need to tell y'all, having been in this business for 40 some years, we're not going to record that, okay? I know where all the bones are buried, guys. I know every crook, nook, and cranny of error that can occur. So, I mean, that's the easy part. The hard part is, and I tell people this all the time, when you do what you do right, and you do it for the right reason, you're going to be fine. The problem is too many people don't, and that's where we get into trouble. So, why do it? It's the law. You like getting hit with the law? I don't, but let's start there. There's a legal foundation in IDEA that was, when it was reauthorized in '97, they introduced us to this concept of functional assessment. Functional assessment's been around a long time. People act like it's something new. It's not. It's been around a long time. It was used way ahead of in the 60s in residential treatment, and it worked really, really well. But you have to understand that in residential programs, they can control variables that we can't control in school. And that's the biggest problem. So we're trying to take a system that worked really well under certain conditions, lift it and put it into a different system that doesn't accept it quite as well. And so this is a challenge for us. But it is the law. And the law requires, you guys that have looked, the law requires that behavior plans must be what? Positive. Positive. Not just, not just change, but they have to be positive. What do you want the child to do? And so you identify the behaviors you want and how you're going to teach those. That's what a behavior plan is. When I go in and I see, a behavior plan that looks like, if the student calls out once, I'll ask him to stop. If he calls out twice, I'll move him to the back of the room. If he calls out 3 times, I send him to the office. That's not a behavior plan, guys. That's a discipline plan, and not a great one at that, but it's a discipline plan. Okay? And what I then do is and one of my favorite things, and I welcome all of you to do this, because this is a blast. Whenever you're in a meeting with a group of teachers and they're griping about a kid, just look at them and say, what would you like him to do? And watch their faces. It's like, what? Well, of course you should know what I want. I want him to stop. No. I want you to tell me, what behaviors do you want him to exhibit, or her? I should start using female pronouns because girls are catching up. All right? Used to be mostly guys, but now we're seeing more and more girls, which is a whole different set of issues. But anyway, what do you want the child to do? And that basically, when those participants are able to say, well, I want him to stay in his seat, or I want her to raise her hand and wait to be called on, those all become the foundation of the behavior plan. Okay, so, we have to know what you expect and what you want from that student in order to build that positive plan. Who's on the team? The same membership that is required for the IEP. In fact, in the law, the burden or the opportunity to conduct that FBA falls on the IEP team. Now, the one thing that we know happens in functional assessment is that oftentimes we invite others who are skilled in the process of assessment, such as your school psychologist. You might have others that you want to bring in, and that's fine. But this is the key membership. And it's very, very important that we understand that, in this team, what we also want to do is make certain that we're asking people to participate in the manner that they have the adequacy to help us with. In other words, you know, you want to ask the key players to do the things that they do best. A number of years ago, I worked in a division locally that shall remain nameless, but our superintendent required us to read a book called Good to Great. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Good to Great, but it was a requirement for us administrators to read, and we had to go talk about it. And I thought this was the most thing I'd ever done in my life, until I read the part where, you know, they started talking about it's not just getting the right people on the bus, it's getting them in the right seats, identifying what you do best and make that your central purpose. And all these things started sticking with me. Because when you work with kids with challenging behavior, that's really what it's about. It's getting the right people there at the table, but then get them in the right seats, give them the right jobs to do. Because if you don't do it, you're not going to get the outcome you want. So in 1997, the Commonwealth of Virginia brought together about 40 professionals from all over the Commonwealth to develop the guidelines for conducting an FBA and developing positive behavior intervention plans and supports. I was very fortunate to be part of that team. I think I might be the last member of that team. I'm certainly the last trainer. In fact, now I'm the only trainer in Virginia for functional assessment and behavior planning, which I think makes them happy because they don't have to worry that they got too many people. They know what I'm going to say. They don't always, I mean, they usually like this. They also know that I do my homework. I don't just blab off. All right, so here we go. There are 10 steps in conducting an assessment and developing a plan. Now, there's researchers out there that suggest that we should do a brief FBA. They call it a shortened FBA or a brief FBA, or some refer to it as an informal FBA. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. As long as the team recognizes what the capacity of that is. In other words, if you're talking about a kid who has constant and chronic violent aggressive behavior, a brief FBA will help. I'm sorry, it's not. If you're not willing to do the hard work, you're not going to get the outcome. If you're talking about a kid who's calling out answers in class, yeah, brief FBA is fine for that. But I would argue, I don't know why we're doing an FBA on a kid calling out answers. I taught kids with disabilities. I wanted any answer in my class. Calling out, hand raised, I didn't care. So I guess I come from maybe a different set of standards. But we have, I mean, and the bottom line is, functional assessment was designed, and by the way, it fits into and under the discipline provisions for kids with disabilities. That's where FBA lives. And the unique thing about functional assessment is it takes up one paragraph of the law. One paragraph. The law says, you know, when there's a chance of a change of placement, which in our world is 10 days. That's why the 10-day provision becomes so important. If it's 10 all at once, 10 cumulative, or if it suggests a pattern. I had somebody the other day told me, they said, well, the federal language doesn't say anything about 10 cumulative. And it doesn't. It doesn't. But what it says is, or a pattern. I will guarantee you that if you've got a kid who's been suspended 10 one-day suspensions, there's a pattern there. And I can find it. So I think it's incumbent upon the schools to do what they need to do. I'm glad I'm making you happy. So we begin by describe and verify the seriousness of the problem. What we mean by that is problem behavior is relative. What's a problem in one teacher's classroom may not be a similar problem in another. That's not what's important. So in other words, and I've been in that meeting where, a teacher is talking about a problem she's having and some other teacher says, well, I don't have that problem. So we think that it stops there. It doesn't stop there. If it's a problem, we need to address it. We need to refine the definition of the problem behavior. Now, anybody who's ever had me for class, they know what that means. When you define a behavior, you define it operationally, you make it what? Make it move. Very good. Make it move. Measurable, observable, and objective. Measurable, observable, and objective. Now I want you to think about Most of the problem behaviors that you come across your desk, does it look like something like this? The student was disrespectful. The student was defiant. The student was insubordinate. Don't we see a lot of that? Can you define that for me? I can't. I don't know what it looks like. If I can't define it, I can't measure it. And if I can't measure it, I certainly can't assess it. See, that's where you have to get that operational definition. So when a teacher says to you, well, he's being disrespectful, what does that mean? He refuses to do his work. Okay, there's one. I can observe that. She rolls her eyes and pops her lips. Okay, I can observe that. I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm actually okay with that. I'm better with that than I am. She's being disrespectful, defiant, disobedient. A lot of distance. And you can't define the definition by what it's not. So you have to give me actual behaviors. Then we collect data. This is always the fun part. How much data do we need? Well, there's no standard. There's no standard. It doesn't say you have to collect data for 28 days. Some people say you have to collect a certain. No. What we know is that you have to collect enough data to feel comfortable making decisions. That's what it means. And there's something to remember in data collection, guys. This is just a kind of a rule of thumb for everybody. No single source nor any single instrument is sufficiently reliable. So I don't care if you have the most gifted teacher or the most gifted therapist. They are but one source of information, and they should be treated as such. To no greater value than anyone else's contribution. And that's very important to remember, guys, because when we start putting all of our assessment data on one person, essentially we're seeing only one picture. And problem behavior is multifaceted. So we collect information, and there are a lot of ways to collect information. We do direct observations, we do questionnaires, we do rating scales, we do all kinds of things, records reviews. What I usually get at this point is how much data and how do we know what to do? That's the team's responsibility. Depending upon the severity of the behavior, the impact, is going to drive what type of data do we need. So if a child's not doing his work, he's off task, I'm going to need something that measures how long, right? I'm going to have something that shows me what is he missing when he's not doing these things. In other words, the behavior drives the data that I collect. And that's another issue that we need to be really careful of. It's not a package. In other words, you don't say, okay, we're going to do this FBA here, fill out these forms. Because every kid brings unique challenges to this process. While I'm on that bandwagon, I'm really scared. The more I'm around, I'm seeing, and I'm seeing it in FBA, in behavior planning, but I'm also seeing it in IEPs, where things are starting to look really all alike, and that scares me. So I know it's not happening in Hampton, but I just want to warn everybody. You know, I mean, I was in a situation where I was doing a review in a school, and I looked at 5 4th grade IEPs, and all 5 of them had almost the exact same objectives and really had the exact same accommodations. And accommodations, by definition, are supposed to be unique to the individual. So anyway, just a side. After we've collected the data, we now have to analyze it. See, this is the other piece of it. Okay, so we get the data, we go, done, got the data. Wow. But now we got to do something with it, right? We got to analyze it. What does it tell us? You know, is the only time that Susie is off task during reading time? She's on task during math. She's on task everywhere else in the building. But in reading, she's not. So what does that tell me? That tells me look deeper into her reading skills. Does she have the skills to do the task I'm asking her to do? And if she doesn't, I would argue that her behavior might be appropriate. I mean, imagine if you're in a situation where you're being asked to do something you don't have the skills to do. As an adult, you just simply what? Get up and walk out. We don't think anything of that. Or you might look at the person and say, I don't know how to do that. We don't have a problem with that. We even say, well, we don't expect you to know how to do everything. We expect our kids to. So maybe we need to look at the skill set, right? So when we're analyzing, and we use an analysis, a research-based method called triangulation, which all that means is you're looking at a minimum of three sources of information, 3 instruments. And what we're trying to figure out is, do they agree? Do they agree? And if they do, then we've got something we can work with, right? We've got information now that we can start making some decisions on. Generate a hypothesis. This is where we start really sounding like a science experiment. And people say, well, we talk about behavior. Good behavior change is science. Because we're using all the methods of science to really affect change in behavior. We generate a hypothesis. And the formula that we use, and this is really important, is we use a very simple formula. Under X conditions, the student does Y in order to Z. So you solve for X, Y, Z. Now, the reason this is important is because if you are correct in your hypothesis, essentially your hypothesis becomes your objective statement for your behavior plan. So let me give you an example. During reading class, Susie disrupts instruction and walks around the room in order to escape the task. Okay? So that's my hypothesis based on my data. Now, if I'm right, where am I going to introduce my behavior plan? During reading class. What am I going to teach Susie to do? So I'm going to replace this need to get out of work with something more appropriate that allows her to get, what you have to understand is if a kid is escape motivated, they're going to get out either on their terms or your terms. So you choose. And I would rather it be on my terms. So if you can't do, Susie, you can raise your hand and ask for help. I'll give you a red dot. When you put the red dot up, I'll come and help you. I mean, we'll find a way to give her an opportunity to get help without having to escape the task. So and now, number 6 is the one that I think really gets people's hair up on the back of their neck, because now we really are getting into a research model where we're testing. Really, when I say test the hypothesis, really what you want to be as certain as you can be of is function. Okay, and if you don't have function right, in other words, the why is the child doing this. If you don't have that right, your interventions are going to fail. So we have to be careful to really pay attention to function. And so that's what we want to test. And unfortunately, most of the time what I find is when I work with schools, and I'll say to them, what do you think the function of the behavior is? I would say 80 to 90% of the time, the response is to get attention. And while attention seeking is a very powerful function, it's about evenly divided with escape. So unfortunately, we have to be careful that we get this right. Step 7 is where we develop our plan. Plan is simple. What do you want the child to do? How are you going to teach it? How are you going to reinforce it? And there's a lot that goes into this whole idea of changing behavior. And it's not as simple as just saying, hey, will you please stop doing that? There's a lot more that has to go in. And in fact, I tell people all the time, we teach an entire course at the college level on functional assessment, and it's 42 hours of time together, and we literally walk through these 10 steps, and we spend, a lot of time on it. So it's what you're getting today, and I just want to let you know, it is kind of the short Reader's Digest version. Because when we started developing behavior plan, We have to now tap into all the information that we know and build a plan out of it. There's no document that everybody has to use. The one thing that we know is that a lot of our electronic IEP providers have behavior plans built into their IEP system. I'm not opposed to that, except my one problem is that there's no place for the documentation of the functional assessment data. And I have that's a problem for me because that forces teachers and others to look in more than one location. They should be able to look at one, but anyway. So we developed the plan. Monitor faithfulness. It's very, very interesting when you look at the research on behavior planning. You're going to see oftentimes a word that pops up constantly, and the word is fidelity. And fidelity means that you apply and deliver the plan in the manner in which it was designed. So if the plan calls for reinforcing a reinforcement schedule of every 5 minutes, then by golly, you got to do it. You can't come in today and go, I just don't feel like doing it today. Because now you don't know if you have a good plan that was poorly implemented or a bad plan. So at the very least, we have to follow the plan with faithfulness or fidelity. And here's the scary part. Most recently, I looked at some research from the University of Florida, Maureen Conroy, some of you may be familiar with Dr. Conroy. And she found in a longitudinal study that you get better outcomes from implementing bad strategies and practices faithfully than best practices sporadically. In other words, if you don't do it faithfully, you actually get better results by doing the wrong things, and that's crazy. So that's why this is so very important. It probably should be highlighted in red or something, but that may be the most important thing, because I think once we develop the plan, a lot of times teachers think, well, we're done. We just started. And everybody who interacts with that student has to be on board. And if they're not, then that's going to obviously affect fidelity, right? Evaluate the effectiveness. Pretty simple. My recommendation, and again, there's no set standard on this, so people, when they ask, I give them my opinion, which is my recommendation. You should meet the first week after implementation of the plan. And don't be surprised if in the first week, when you go back to the table, the team reports what? It's getting worse. It's getting worse. And this is where I need you guys to understand. You want to jump up and go, yeah, yippee! And they're going to look at you like you've lost your mind. But why? Because if you apply the right intervention, you're going to hit a nerve. And that kid's going to try and push you off that intervention. He don't want you having that kind of power that data analysis gives you. And you're right. I remember going into a meeting one time and the team said, well, the kid's not doing it. He's not responding at all. And let's go back and look at the data. Something's wrong. Because one of two things should happen in that first week. One is it should get worse before it gets better. Or two, and this is the other phenomena in special ed, it's called the honeymoon. You guys ever heard of that? Where the kid becomes overly compliant immediately. In both instances, kids are smart. They figure out, okay, if I'm compliant, they'll stop intervening. If I act out, they'll stop intervening. And so you've got to be smarter than them and say, no, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to stay with my plan. And finally, you modify your plan as needed. Hopefully your modifications are, you're identifying new behaviors that you're working on. You're seeing improved behaviors. You're changing your reinforcement schedules. There are things that should be occurring. That's why when I talk to people, these are dynamic processes. They are not singular events. You should be changing things. So down and dirty, that's FBA. That's FBA. That's BIP. Now, it's really interesting because usually this is the time when we studies and and I give everybody stuff to do. And it always amazes me that in these kind of settings, we get everything right. We never miss a beat. Why is it we can't do the same thing in the classroom? Because all the variables are different. It's tough when you're working with 25 kids who you might have 3 or 4 that are challenging you. Okay, it's a lot different than sitting around doing a case study. I always get case studies right. My grandma gave me this. This was her favorite saying. Used to. We used to do this and we used to do that, right? So I came up with the rest of it. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. Now, I know that's not proper English, so if you guys are any literacy guys here, just forgive me. But what I mean by that is, and I tell teachers this all the time, if what you're doing is working, if you're producing positive outcomes for your kids and you can document that, my golly, you stay with it. You stay with it. But if you're not, then we have an obligation to change something. Okay? And changing something might be as simple as saying, excuse me, can you move to that seat? That might be all it takes. But we got to do something. Too often what I find is I see the adult come in and go, well, I'm going to change this behavior. And I'll be darned if that 5-year-old's going to get the best of me. Right? Well, guess what? They will. Because they have more at stake than we have. So you got to change something. You got to be okay to change something. And I give you permission to change simple things. I find that there's a model, I guess you'd call it. It's called Occam's razor. And they talk about that the simplest response to a problem is the one you should try first. It's not always going to work, but it's where you should try first. So, it's like when you have a child misbehaving, what's the simplest thing we can do? Ask them to stop. That's the simple thing. Now, is that going to work? Maybe not. Maybe not. 99.9% of the time it might not, but 1.1% it does. I'll take that. Because that's simple. All right? And I think sometimes one of my favorite analogies is if you go home tonight, you walk into your house, you turn your light on as you walk in you're full yay, and the light doesn't come on. What are you going to check? The fuse, the bulb, switch. One lady in Franklin told me, she said, I'm going to check to make sure I paid my bill. Those are all simple responses, aren't they? They're simple responses. I don't think any of us would call an electrician, would we? And see, that's what we tend to want to do in behavior change. We want to call an electrician for a bulb being out. There's often simple solutions, guys. And we have to seek those out first. And if we can't find them, that's when we start resorting to, and I do mean resorting to, because the more intense and complex we make behavior change, the harder it's going to be on the teachers to implement. It's that simple, guys. You've got a class of 25 kids, I'm teaching, if I'm in an elementary school, I'm teaching all the content all day, and now you're going to drop this bomb on me? That's a lot to ask, and I get it. But I also get that when I look at teachers and I ask them, I say, how much time are you spending right now addressing the problem? And I have teachers say, well, I'm spending half my day. Half your day? That takes away a lot of time. So let's reappropriate our time. Let's repurpose that time, right? All right, questions. I threw a lot at you fast. You got the handouts. But questions, what do you got? I think they have to have it. Steve, hit that button right there so they can record. They're going to record you. You're recording.
Okay, what I have found in the past, and I have a daughter that's in the 4th grade now. She's had a behavioral intervention plan since kindergarten. What I have found to be the norm is that prior to school starting every year, the special ed teacher is aware of what it says. But because she's integrated, the general ed teacher that spends the most time with her sometimes I'm not even sure they know she has a behavioral intervention plan. When do you suggest the best time is that each year the new teachers are oriented?
That's a great question. That's a great question. What I would suggest is at your initial IEP meeting, and you know, and when I had students, as an administrator, when I was, I would have my teams identify students that had existing behavior plans, and I would say to them, we need to meet before school starts so that everybody's aware. And I don't want anybody to ever think that I hold myself up on a pedestal. I had teachers that challenged me in terms of, you know, what they thought was appropriate. And what I basically said to my teachers is, you're welcome. I welcome any data that you can give me, but your thoughts, your beliefs, and your feelings are not part of that. So if, you know, we're going to work together on this, you need to follow this plan. And I would suggest, again, the law is silent on this, but it makes sense that you would meet prior to and talk about it. And one of the things that I also think is important is, I mean, we look at that teacher and we say, if there's anything in this plan that you don't understand or, you know, that you want to discuss. And if the teacher says, well, I don't know how I'm going to reinforce on 5-minute intervals. Okay, so what can you do? What's reasonable? Well, I can do 15 minutes. Okay, so we can do that. There's nothing that says we can't make that change. And then at least we're all on board. Because that's where we got to start. If we're not all on board, it doesn't matter how good the plan is, right? And I think a lot of times what I find is that every year, especially now, we were joking about out in the foyer before, somebody was talking about having a student for 2 years. I had kids for 6 years because I did K-5. So I got them in kindergarten and I had them all the way up to 5th grade. So, you know, I got to know my kids really, really well. I think sometimes, you know, in our effort to do inclusion, which is a wonderful thing, it brings in new people every year. And sometimes new case managers and when you start introducing lots of new people, that creates the opportunity for things not to run as smooth. So that would be my suggestion. And I think that would be, you know, something that as a parent, I would say, you know, I'm not trying to tell you your job, but maybe we should meet about this and just talk about behavior plan. Because when we follow through the way it's supposed to be done, it seems to be working. Any other questions?
You had mentioned who is on the FBA development team and were parents, teachers of a typical IEP. When do you think it's important to pull in the behaviors to BCBA, you know, if at all?
That's a team question, and I don't want to deflect it, okay? But I work with behaviors. I was actually called a behavior specialist before it was ever in vogue. I'm not a BCBA. My wife is, and we have lots of discussions about stuff that, I mean, it's a team decision because ABA is a service. And so whenever you start talking about any kind of service like that, I think it's important for the team to make that decision. Now, that being said, I think any information that can be provided, whether it's to a parent or whoever, to bring to the team is useful. But you know, we have to be really, really careful because we're adding lots of people, and where I started beginning talking about stakeholders. In schools, it's really hard to take things from outside school and put them into school. It doesn't always work well. And I learned that when I was doing in residential work, where we would have kids who were receiving therapy, and then we were trying to translate that into school, and it just didn't fit. It's kind of, and we're seeing it now. Y'all do the treatment therapy goals. You got therapists who are trying to, I use the word therapy, I know that's not right, but they're doing therapy, and you have teachers teaching. And I was just recently in a school, a day treatment program. Kid misbehaves in the classroom. They call the therapist to come get the job. Therapist comes get the job. They walk them around. I don't know how long. give them some goldfish and a box of juice, and send them back to class. Kid goes back to class and goes, now I gotta be man. No, I want juice and fish. So what does the kid do? Acts out. Remember I told you, laws of behavior. We know what they are. So I'm not trying to deflect the question. It's just I'm a big believer in keeping things in the system the way they belong. So when we talk about services, that's an IEP team decision. The additional participants need to be part of that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was referring to behaviors within the school.
Oh yeah, no, and even there, I think, and I think even there we have to be careful, because if we're using a behaviorist, even if they're school-based, they still have to know the kid and they have to know the situation. I mean, I can't tell you guys how many times I get calls, can you come out and assist us on an FBA? And my answer is no. I'll come out and train your staff, I'll facilitate your teams, but I can't do an FBA for you. It's unethical for me to do that, because I'm like a grandparent. I leave. And if I'm not a stakeholder, then there's no value to that. And so that's one of the risks that I think we run when we start bringing in people, not outsiders necessarily, but just people who drive in. I used to call it drive-in. Drive-in consults. I used to do lots of those. I'd drive in and do a one-day consult on a kid and send a report. Who knows how valuable that is.
How do you identify a school that need your assistance?
How do I identify?
Yes.
I don't identify.
I mean,
the school or division would identify and ask, and again, it really depends. Like I said, we do trainings in the summer. We do full batteries of trainings on FBA. We get a lot of school divisions that send teams of people and they get trained. Now, again, we all know we train, we provide, but it's very, very different to take something from training and theory and put it into practice. It's hard. And I mean, I've been doing this for over 40 years and I still struggle from time to time.
what do we do for our new teachers? Because like Hampton, we have new teachers everywhere, and they have no idea what's going on in the real world, and that is parent, teacher, school, communities, and all this thing.
Well, I think that's where, again, as a parent, your role is to help that teacher understand what is going on and what you know. You're a vital part of the process. I tell parents all the time, I rely on my parents. I rely on my parents to give me information that I don't have. And I can remember years ago, and I tell this story because I lived it. But I can remember sitting in a meeting and discussing a student's behavior, and the parent looked at me and said, I don't have that problem at home. Right? And I remember thinking to myself, why are you lying to me? You got to, that kid, there's no way. But what I realized was they probably are having the problem at home. I mean, how many of you have kids? How many of you have kids? How many of you take them home at the end of the day, sit them in the most uncomfortable chair you can find for 6.5 hours and talk at them? Because that's what we do in school. Now, we might let them get up and move around a little bit, but essentially, school is an academic environment. It's different than other environments, right? So, I mean, as a parent, when my kids would act up and aggravate me, I'd send them out in the backyard. I didn't have a problem with that. Get out, go on out there, run it off. My wife used to say, they're going to get lost. And they never do. They always come home. They were using Reese's Pieces or something. I don't know.
I think I could get away with that.
What? Put them out the yard. As long as it's not a street, yeah, I can get away with it. I think I'm at my time. But I want to share with you, along with the handout, is my email is on there. And what I would ask is, if I can be of any help, if I can answer any questions, I'll be happy to do that. If you ever need any assistance, and then certainly from the schools, you guys know how to reach me, and I'll be happy to help any way I can. But I just appreciate having these few minutes to spend with you guys and see what a great organization you are, and what great leadership. I can honestly tell you, I don't ever get to speak to the deputy superintendent, all right? Now, I don't know if that means that maybe they were worried about me, Kathy. What do you think? Huh? I think I was going to say something, but I appreciate it. I know Dr. Caggiano, and, I just thought I'd take a shot at you. Yes, sir?
From a parent's perspective, this has been, very productive, 45 minutes or whatever,
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I do appreciate your time. If I can help y'all, let me know, okay?
Thank you.
So let me hit this last one, so you can see I enjoy myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Thank you so much.
You gotta stop calling me Mr. Butler.
Oh,
CJ.
CJ.
Who are you talking about?
Thank you so much for coming tonight and presenting. There is, for information, our next meeting and parent training, the Special Education Department will be doing their, parent training on Tuesday, January 8th, 2019, and it's almost here at 6 p.m. So the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
That's right.